Darth Vader has been the topic of many heated discussions lately in the Dead by Daylight community, causing a war between the fans who want DbD to open their gates for non-horror chapters and the fans who want to keep DbD horror only for licensed chapters. For those of you out of the loop, in short, this all came from an interview with Mathieu Coté, the head of partnerships of Dead by Daylight, made by the French content creator Saul Palin. In this interview, Mathieu revealed that talks related to Darth Vader have happened with Disney, as well as talks about Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
Mais j'ai eu une conversation avec notre contact chez Disney où on a mentionné Darth Vader. Ça c'est arrivé, c'est un fait.
It's very important to note that this doesn't mean Darth Vader is coming to Dead by Daylight in the future. It just means they talked about it. Considering how extremely secretive Mathieu is with future licensed content, and how he refuses to answer any question that could give a hint as to what the future licensed content will be, the fact that he just name-dropped Darth Vader with zero confidentiality means that Star Wars is not anywhere near being in Dead by Daylight. Talking about it could mean many things, but it could also just be a brainstorming session on which Disney characters they could add to DbD. We know already that, for example, Terrifier was also a license that was talked about with DbD, but it fell through, and there are many more like these, so even if it goes somewhere, there is a chance that the devs or Disney simply do not agree on things and drop it. So even if, at best, Vader is coming to DbD, it's going to take at least 5 years in order to see him. So just the possibility of Vader being in DbD in the far future was enough to create such a war in the community between the two sides. And I would like to take part on it, because I think this conversation is pretty fun to have as to what does and doesn't fit in Dead by Daylight, and also because I know that once Springtrap releases, nobody is going to care about this topic. In short, my stance is that anything that can be made and presented in a horror way absolutely fits Dead by Daylight, and Darth Vader is one of the many non-horror characters they could add, with Star Wars actually being one of the licensed chapters that could beat Five Nights at Freddy's in terms of impact to the game. In this video, I want to share my argument against each of the popular points I found against Darth Vader, from the dumbest ones to the actual ones that deserve a debate. And since this is such a hot topic, I am looking forward to the comments of this video. Now, before you make a comment yourself, all I ask is that you make sure what a straw man and the slippery slope fallacies are. If your comment implies that because of them adding Vader that the next killer is going to be Nicki Minaj, then I am not going to take it seriously. And if your comment implies that because Vader is a good fit, the same is applied to Bowser from Mario, then I also will not take that comment seriously. So let's start with the dumbest arguments I have seen against him, and that is how Vader is way too strong as a character, and the Force would be overpowered. I still cannot believe there are people saying this when we have Pinhead, Vecna, and Sadako in the game, all characters that could kill all 4 survivors at the start of the match if they wanted to without even having to move. Even if you don't want to count licensed characters, then we have the Plague, who could literally kill all survivors with one drop of the vomit, or the Dredge, which is a creature that no survivor would survive against. The entire point of Dead by Daylight is that it's a game for the entity, so if it has to, it will nerf all survivors and killers in order for them to play the cat and mouse chase game. This is straight up confirmed canonically in Freddy Krueger's lore, as it says that the entity is able to manipulate the powers of the killers in order to focus them in some aspects and nerf them in others. So the entity can nerf the Force of Vader so that he can no longer just use the Force choke in order to break the survivor's neck. If the argument is more towards the power fantasy of killers in Dead by Daylight, that is sadly part of the game, and I cannot argue against that. It is true that Vecna is pathetic in this game compared to how insanely strong he is in Dungeons and Dragons, so seeing Vader being stunned by head-on is very off-putting. But something that many players forget is how seeing the killers in this state is also part of the horror of DbD, as the games are also punishments for the killers. In a meta sense, It's also important to remember that the license holders are the ones which tell behavior if their power fits the character they are introducing. It's why I think arguing about the fire axe for Springtrap not being lore accurate is a bad take, when Scott Cawthon, the creator of Springtrap, approved of that power design, as he could have easily said no. So if Vader is in DbD, the power would be approved by Disney. Another argument I have seen against him is how the lightsaber would be ridiculous as a weapon, and I think there is only one problem with this weapon. In terms of strength, nerfing weapons has been something since the release of the game, as Hillbilly doesn't instantly kill survivors with a chainsaw, or the Knight doesn't cut survivors in half with the Claymore. In fact, there is nothing that is going to be as nerfed as Vecna's Afterthought Dagger, since canonically, this weapon is basically an insta-kill, yet in DbD, it just does 1 damage state. Besides, you can heal any wound just by scratching a survivor's back, so this argument just falls apart so easily. If the argument is more focused on the license holders not wanting to see the lightsaber being so nerfed, this is Darth Vader in Soul Calibur 4, an official collab where he can use it as his main weapon against human opponents, and they also don't get cut in half. Once again, this argument just falls apart. I think it would be really cool if the devs made it so that attacking anything with the lightsaber creates a cut on the object, similar to how it looks in the Jedi games. This is already a technology they have for Deathslinger's chain, as it turns bright orange when it's in an obstacle, and it would make the lightsaber stand out compared to the other weapons. The only true problem is weapon cosmetics, because the red lightsaber is iconic for Vader, so changing the colors is a no-no for the license holders for sure. The maximum I can see there being is a prestige version of the saber where the hilt has the prestige veins, but the Cenobite has this exact same problem where the weapon barely changes in-game, so this would not be a first for them. I have also seen that many fans do not want to have a Disney license in Dead by Daylight, to which I cannot argue, as that is something subjective and each person has their own problems with the company, like Disney using AI voices most recently. The only thing I do want to say related to this topic is that many fans don't want Disney to collab with DbD, but they don't know that they already did, as the Alien franchise is owned by Disney, and since there is a high chance we are getting Predator in the future, those are 2 characters owned by the same company, so it's a bit too late for that. And now for one of the 2 big arguments against Vader that I have seen, and that is the fact that Vader doesn't fit Dead by Daylight as a killer, to which I once again disagree, and this is where the fun part begins, as for this to be answered, we need to think about many things, from what is considered horror to what would Vader be in the context of Dead by Daylight. So, first of all, I want to make it clear that Star Wars is not a horror saga, nor a horror adjacent saga at all. This I completely agree with, and I see no point in arguing it. And yes, I am aware that there is a comic that has zombie elements to it, but it's a very niche comic that I don't think is enough to call the entire saga horror. You don't watch Star Wars in order to be jump scared or feel the psychological terror that Vader can inflict on the viewer. You watch it for the drama and the plot. But what Darth Vader is and can be is intimidating. Compared to other killers in Dead by Daylight, Darth Vader is much more horrific, as his kill count would be one of the highest in the game along with Vecna. Darth Vader is feared by entire galaxies, and he uses that intimidation and fear in order to bring down the rest. His army fears him, his generals fear him, and anytime he's shown in a horror-centric manner, he absolutely dominates the scene. You can see this in the iconic hallway scene from Rogue One, where they put Vader in a more horror-centered scene. He gives fear. I am not using this scene to say that Darth Vader is a horror icon like Jason, because he is not, but when put in a horror-focused scene, he absolutely fits like a glove. There is another scene that I absolutely love, from the Jedi Fallen Order game, where it shows just how insanely intimidating and scary he is, to the point that just his breathing is enough to to make someone be scared for their life. And these two scenes are examples out of many that exist in the Star Wars saga, as there are many other scenes like this or snippets from the comics where they show him in an incredibly brutal way. He is also incredibly cruel, as he kills people with no mercy. In one scene from the Obi-Wan series, he uses the Force just to drag him over the fire purely to make him suffer, showing that he is sadistic. In that same series, he straight up kills a child by snapping their neck with the Force, no hesitation. And talking about children, that's one of the many atrocities he has committed in his career. And this is where I have to compare him to other killers already in Dead by Daylight, where I ask the question, what makes them horror and Vader not? Outside of the fact that Vader was made for a non-horror saga. Take Oni for example. He has killed many, feared in Japan and known as a scary legend, and very cruel in his methods. Vader is the same, but he is feared in the entire galaxy, not just Japan. If the answer is that Oni's visual design is more horror focused, Darth Vader can also be made in a darker way, as he is literally almost a walking corpse inside a suit that is designed to keep him alive, which is an element of body horror. If it's the power design of the Oni with the scream and speed during Blood Fury, then that's fair. But Vader can also have a power that is scary, as imagine being undetectable and survivors can only hear the breathing of the menacing man, with the red light of the saber illuminating the ground like the red stain of the entity. The Knight is also another killer that for me personally, he is not scary in design. He is a generic dark fantasy knight that could fit perfectly as the first boss from a Dark Souls run, and his backstory is very similar to Vader in terms of feats. Started as a child slave, cruel, merciless, intimidating, feared in their lands, and have killed many. What makes Knight not a normal knight is the fact that he was made in Dead by Daylight, but he could easily fit as an enemy in various other dark fantasy games with zero changes. And there are many more original killer examples like this. The Legion is a true crime case who have only killed one person before being taken by the entity. So does that make Silento, the creator of the Nene, a potential candidate for Dead by Daylight? How about Skull Merchant, who could easily be a villain from DC Comics? Does that give a free pass for the Joker and the Scarecrow? Houndmaster is a character who could easily fit in the Pirates of the Caribbean films. So does that mean Davy Jones is a horror character that would fit DbD like a glove? In fact, what makes a character horror? Is it their actions? Because if it is, there are Pokemon that are incredibly scary in concept, like Chandelure burning your spirit for eternity, or Mimikyu, who has killed a researcher because of how horrific its true body is according to the Pokédex. Is it a character's visual design? Because in that case, the Redettes from The Legend of Zelda are scarier than all of the killers in the game currently outside of the unknown. So, is it because they have to come from a horror franchise? Because in that case, Fiddlesticks is not scary, not horror either, since he was made for League of Legends, a MOBA. Or is it when they are inspired by horror? Because Castlevania is not scary, but it is undeniably inspired by horror. So that means we might get Dr. Zombos as a killer, since Plants vs Zombies is also undeniably inspired by horror. The reason why DbD characters get a free pass, despite most of them being mediocre when compared to other characters in horror adjacent fiction like from Zelda or from League of Legends, is because they were designed for horror and are present in a horror context. And that's my entire point. Darth Vader might not be from a horror saga, but he can be made into a horror character in Dead by Daylight, and it wouldn't even be a stretch, because he already has horror adjacent features in the original source material. This is something the devs have already done with Kaneki, who is a character that in his own universe is an absolute sweetheart. Absolutely nobody in the entirety of the existence of Tokyo Ghoul was scared of Kaneki, as he is not a villain. Him killing survivors goes completely against the entire message of the Tokyo Ghoul series, but that's not the normal Ken Kaneki we have in DbD. We have the one that was taken from the universe where Kaneki lost, where he embraced being a ghoul. We got the darkest version of Kaneki as the killer in DbD, and outside of a very small minority that claims anime has no place in Dead by Daylight, I would say that the devs have done a really good job so far in adapting him to the games. If we do get Darth Vader, we are not getting the one from the LEGO games, or the one that is marketed towards children. We would be getting the darkest, most cruel and violent Vader out of all, a horror version of one of the most iconic characters in fiction. My answer is pretty clear. Darth Vader is not a horror character, but the one in Dead by Daylight would be a horror character. Something I absolutely hate to hear when people talk about this debate is how DbD is becoming like Fortnite, but I think this is a very disingenuous comparison between the two. In my opinion, Dead by Daylight is one of the only games where the collabs actually feed the game without causing any chaos, and I look at them more as a love letter to the saga they come from. In Fortnite, the collabs are most of the time just skins, and maybe one or two new mechanics based on it, or a new place in the map, but that's it. Playing as Hatsune Miku is exactly the same as playing as Sabrina Carpenter. I would say Call of Duty is a great example of a Fortnite-ified game, where the collabs are just there for cash value. But in Dead by Daylight, the collabs are on another level. When you play as Springtrap, you feel like Springtrap. FNAF fans finally got an adult version of William Afton, a version without censorship that adds more to the character and makes fans so happy. The map is insanely detailed and cool, and it's just overall great to be able to play as the iconic killer. The vast majority of licenses are like this. They are not done just for money. They are done as a love letter to the original source, filled with references and Easter eggs. Instead of being just like a cosmetic, like in Fortnite or Call of Duty, in Dead by Daylight, the licenses are part of the universe of the game, allowing you to see the character in a way you never could before. I would argue that if the choices are between getting a Star Wars cosmetic collab or a chapter, then the second option is much better, as the cosmetic collab are indeed done just as a cash grab, whereas the chapters allow us to see the characters in a completely new light. The only problem of that is the fact that there can be license content fatigue, but then the problem is unrelated to the topic of this video. The only argument that I will respect, and I also agree with, is that horror characters should have priority in Dead by Daylight. I would much rather have the Predator or the Terminator as chapters before we get Vader. So if you think this way, then we both agree. The thing is that Vader is something that maybe is considered in the far future, and to be honest, the big horror licenses in Dead by Daylight are running out. The only two characters that I can think of from horror media that might be on the same level of hype as Springtrap or Resident Evil are Pennywise and Jason, but that's about it. The vast majority of horror characters are very niche, and when you think of Behavior as the company it is that wants to bring more players to the game, it's clear that Star Wars sells more than Clock Tower or Fatal Frame could ever do. Darth Vader would be the gate opener for Dead by Daylight, which would open our eyes to more potential characters to be added to the game. And the funniest part is that we have already gone through various gate openers in the game already, and I say this as someone who was very involved with the DbD community since 2016. We currently have 3 licensed characters which nowadays absolutely fit the game, but back then the community said that it would never happen, it would not work, and they don't fit Dead by Daylight at all. One of the characters is the Demogorgon. Back then, the community said that the Demogorgon would not be a good fit for a killer because all the past killers were humans, and it made logical sense as to why they would put survivors on a hook, whereas the Demogorgon is a monster, so seeing it hook a survivor is just weird. They also said that the Demogorgon is not a unique character, but instead a minion, as there were many Demogorgons that exist, but there is only one Trapper, for example. It's clear that if they chose a killer, it would be Billy, but no, it ended up being the Demogorgon, and it allowed us to see more creatures like the Xenomorph, and hopefully more in the future, like the Indoraptor from Jurassic World, the last one actually being from a film that is not known as a horror film, yet it is one of the most requested licenses in the community and even endorsed by a developer. Another character just like this was Sadako. If you think about it, Sadako is by far the character that fits the least in the core gameplay of DbD. Funnily enough, Sadako fits DbD less than both Baldi from Baldi's Basics and Bendy from Bendy and the Ink Machine. She doesn't touch survivors at any point, and she is not considered a slasher character, as she is purely a psychological killer. She doesn't chase anyone, she is a curse, but the devs made it work. Nowadays, she is just one more killer, but back in the days, she was one of the weirdest choices for a character that behavior has done up to that point. Of course, we also have to talk about Chucky, the character which would never happen in DbD, yet there he is. In short, there are 3 characters that have completely shut down the notion of they would never work in Dead by Daylight, and I feel like Darth Vader would be another example, where before his inclusion there is a lot of debate, but after he is added, nobody would complain after some weeks, which is also the exact same that happened to Vecna. At this point, if the devs can, and if the devs find the characters cool, that's enough for them to be in Dead by Daylight, and we don't get to decide what does and doesn't fit in the game. And that's the final thing I would like to talk about, and that is the fans that consider DbD to be too far gone, as the atmosphere of the original is dead when Vader gets in. And I am not going to argue that it isn't, because it is. The original DbD we had way back is absolutely not the same we have today. The game has strayed significantly from its horror roots, and nowadays we get more absurd stuff as part of the game. Dead by Daylight officially created a dating simulator game, putting their visceral characters in a comedic way. They have sold body pillows of David King and Huntress. One of the skins coming soon is this, and many players were happy about it. Many things have changed since then. The devs said that no characters would ever talk, yet nowadays we have survivors insulting the killers, and others making jokes in the lobby like Nicolas Cage or Sable with her absurd yum. In fact, for me, the worst offender of immersion breaking is Orella Rose, who is an original character. I absolutely love the majority of her voice lines, and I think they are perfectly fitting in the context of the game. But there is one that she does which does not sit right with me. Sometimes, when she gets unhooked, she will literally crack a corny joke.
Guess I'm off the hook.
Having a survivor say a joke after being saved from an impaled hook completely kills any semblance of atmosphere it had in the past, because this is not a cosmetic or anything. This is a normal survivor which we are supposed to feel represented by. The point I'm making is that Darth Vader would not break the game at all, like many people in the community are now exaggerating. It will still be a chase game that it has always been. Literally, I feel like nothing would change if there were to be a Star Wars update, as the casuals would love it and still be scared of this killer, and the Sith mains will find ways to increase his skill ceiling by a lot. Dead by Daylight would still be the same Dead by Daylight in its core with Vader on it, because the atmosphere you missed has been long gone before this debate even began, and this phenomenon is something I have heard in almost every single community I have been part of, like Fortnite, Minecraft or Call of Duty. And I think in the end, that if the devs see Vader as a great fit, and they can make him loyal to the source material and horrific enough to be a killer in Dead by Daylight, then so be it. It's their game, their vision, and if you truly find a problem with it, Matthew Cote has said it best.
No, it's true. I mean, change it up. Maybe you're just tired, you know, or play something else for a week. Try Civilization or something, just for a refreshing change.
Let me know what you think of this debate, because I am curious of your opinions. As always, thank you for watching and have a nice day.